Behind the screaming guitars and pyrotechnics, some of rock's biggest names were hiding some truly dark secrets. We're pulling back the curtain on the controversies they thought were long forgotten. From backstage fights that ended careers to a shocking plan that landed a singer in prison, you won't believe what they did. 1. Ozzy Osbourne and the Bat. Many people are crazy about Ozzy Osbourne. He's known as the Prince of Darkness and the Godfather of heavy metal. His work with Black Sabbath and as a solo artist created a whole new sound. But not all things are what they seem, and his reputation for being wild isn't just an act. One of the most famous stories about him is so bizarre it sounds completely made up. But the thing nobody tells you is, it really happened. On January 20th, 1982, Ozzy was performing a sold-out show in Des Moines, Iowa. The crowd was going wild, and as part of the show, fans would often throw things on stage. Usually, it was fake bats or other spooky toys. On this night, a real live bat was thrown onto the stage. You see, Ozzy, thinking it was a rubber toy, picked it up and, in a moment of pure showmanship, bit its head off. It was only when he felt the warm liquid and the crunch that he realized something was terribly wrong. This is why this is huge. The incident became a global headline. It cemented his image as the craziest man in rock and roll. To put it mildly, the aftermath was not fun for Ozzy. He had to be rushed to the hospital immediately after the show to begin a painful series of rabies shots. What many overlooked is that the bat itself was taken for testing, but the results were never conclusive. The story became a legend, a shocking moment that Ozzy himself tried to downplay for years as just a crazy mistake. This stunt set a new bar for shocking stage behavior, but another rock star's actions off stage would have far more tragic and lasting consequences. 2. Vince Neil and the tragic car crash. In the 1980s, Motley Crue was on top of the world. They were the kings of the Sunset Strip, famous for their loud music, big hair, and even bigger parties. The band, especially frontman Vince Neil, was known for living a life of pure excess. Their motto seemed to be, "Live fast," but that lifestyle came with a terrible price that would haunt them forever. On December 8, 1984, the band was at a party at Vince Neil's home in Redondo Beach, California. They ran out of refreshments, so Neil and his friend, a musician named Razzle from the band Hanoi Rocks, decided to make a quick trip to the store. What many overlooked is that both men had been celebrating heavily all day. Neil got behind the wheel of his fancy sports car, a red De Tomaso Pantera, and sped down the wet streets. Tragedy struck just moments later. Neil lost control of the car, swerving into oncoming traffic and colliding with another vehicle. The impact was devastating. Razzle was lost in the crash, and the two people in the other car suffered severe injuries. This is why this is huge. The event sent shockwaves through the rock community. To put it mildly, the legal consequences were surprisingly light. Neil was charged with serious crimes, but ended up serving only about 19 days in jail and paying a fine. Many felt that his celebrity status got him a lenient sentence. The band tried to move past it, but the shadow of that night followed them, a dark reminder of a party that ended in the most heartbreaking way possible. A rock star facing legal trouble was nothing new. But our next story involves a band that was put on trial not for their actions, but for the music itself. 3. Judas Priest and the Subliminal Message Trial. Judas Priest is one of the most important bands in heavy metal history. With their leather and studs look and their twin guitar attack, they helped define the genre in the late 1970s and 80s. They were known for powerful songs and epic live shows. But in 1990, they found themselves in a courtroom, fighting for their career and their reputation against some very serious accusations. The whole thing started in 1985 when two young men in Reno, Nevada made a tragic choice that ended their lives. Their parents, grieving and looking for answers, filed a lawsuit against Judas Priest. They claimed that the band's album, Stained Class, contained hidden subliminal messages that had influenced the young men. Specifically, they pointed to the song Better by You, Better Than Me, claiming that when played backward, it contained the phrase, "Do it." This is why this is huge. The trial became a media circus. It was the peak of the Satanic Panic era, a time when many people were afraid of heavy metal music and its supposed evil influence. The band had to go to court and defend their art. They explained that any backward sounds were just accidental studio noises. Rob Halford, the band's singer, even played different songs in court to show how any recording could sound like something else when played backward. To put it mildly, it was a bizarre and stressful time for the band. After a long trial, the judge finally ruled in their favor, stating that there was no evidence that they had intentionally placed subliminal messages in their music. The band tried to hide their frustration, but the scandal left a permanent mark. The idea of a band influencing their fans was at the heart of that trial. But the next scandal on our list was caused by a frontman who influenced his fans in a much more direct and destructive way. 4. Axl Rose and the St. Louis Riot. Guns N' Roses was the most dangerous band in the world in the late 80s and early 90s. Led by their unpredictable and fiery frontman, Axl Rose, their concerts were legendary for being chaotic, wild, and often starting hours late. Axl was known for his incredible voice and his short temper. On July 2, 1991, that temper exploded in a way that led to a full-blown riot. The band was playing a show at the Riverport Amphitheater near St. Louis, Missouri. The concert was part of their massive Use Your Illusion tour. During the song Rocket Queen, Axl spotted someone in the crowd with a camera. Back then, unauthorized recording was a huge issue for bands. You see, Axl pointed out the person to security, but he felt they weren't acting fast enough, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. In a move that shocked everyone, he announced, "Well, thanks to the lame-brained security, I'm going home," and then dove headfirst into the crowd. He went after the person with the camera, got into a scuffle, was pulled back on stage by the crew, and then promptly grabbed his microphone, slammed it on the stage, and walked off. The rest of the band followed, and the show was over. The crowd of over 20,000 people was furious. They had waited for the band, and now they felt cheated. Their anger boiled over, and they began to riot. They tore up seats, smashed equipment, and set fires. The damages were estimated to be over $200,000, and dozens of people were injured. Axl Rose was charged with inciting a riot, and the band was banned from St. Louis for years. They tried to blame the venue's security, but everyone knew whose tantrum had lit the fuse. Axl's outburst caused chaos for one night. But in the frozen landscape of Norway, a different kind of musical chaos was brewing, one that would have much darker and more permanent consequences. 5. The Norwegian black metal scene and its dark actions. In the early 1990s, a new and extreme form of heavy metal was born in the cold, dark winters of Norway. It was called black metal, and it was faster, harsher, and had a much darker message than anything that had come before. Bands like Mayhem, Burzum, and Emperor were at the center of this new scene. But what started as a musical movement quickly spiraled into something much more sinister. What many overlooked is that this small, tight-knit group of young musicians was not just playing music about darkness and anti-Christian ideas, they were living it. You see, they wanted to spread fear and chaos. This led to a series of shocking acts that made international headlines. The most famous of these were the church burnings. Between 1992 and 1996, over 50 historic wooden churches in Norway were set on fire, and many were completely destroyed. Some of these churches were hundreds of years old, beautiful landmarks that were priceless pieces of Norwegian history. This is why this is huge. Members of the black metal scene were directly responsible for many of these fires. They saw it as a symbolic act, a war against Christianity, and a way to bring back the old pagan spirit of their ancestors. But the darkness didn't stop there. The scene was also plagued by internal conflicts and violence. The most infamous event was the passing of Mayhem's guitarist, known as Euronymous, at the hands of another musician, Varg Vikernes of Burzum. The whole scene tried to frame their actions as part of a philosophical war, but to the rest of the world, it was a shocking and destructive crime spree that left a beautiful country scarred. The actions in Norway were driven by a dark ideology, but sometimes a scandal can erupt from a single, thoughtless moment on stage, as one famous frontman learned the hard way. 6. Phil Anselmo and the White Power Outburst. Phil Anselmo is a legendary figure in heavy metal. As the frontman for Pantera, his powerful voice and intense stage presence helped the band become one of the biggest metal acts of the 1990s. After Pantera, he stayed active with other bands like Down and Superjoint Ritual. He has always been a controversial figure, known for his aggressive attitude. But in 2016, his actions at a tribute concert caused a massive scandal that he still hasn't fully lived down. The event was the Dime Bash, an annual concert held in Hollywood to honor his late Pantera bandmate, Dimebag Darrell. Anselmo was one of the headliners, performing Pantera songs with other famous musicians. At the end of the night, as he was walking off stage, he gave what appeared to be a Nazi salute to the crowd and shouted the words, "White Power." The moment was caught on video by multiple fans in the audience, and it went viral almost instantly. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Fans, fellow musicians, and concert promoters condemned his actions. To put it mildly, his initial excuse did not help. He claimed it was an inside joke about drinking white wine backstage and that he was just being silly. Nobody bought it. The gesture and the words were too ugly and had too much history behind them. This is why this is huge. In the following days, he was dropped from festival appearances, and many of his peers in the music world publicly criticized him. He eventually released a more serious apology, admitting he was wrong and that his actions were offensive. He tried to hide behind a bad joke, but the scandal exposed a dark side that many had long suspected. Anselmo was accused of promoting hate. Our next star was also linked to a terrible event, but in his case, he was unfairly blamed for a national tragedy. 7. Marilyn Manson and the Columbine accusations. Marilyn Manson built his entire career on being shocking. With his ghoulish makeup, industrial metal sound, and lyrics that challenged religion and authority, he became one of the most controversial figures of the late 1990s. He was the artist that parents loved to hate, and he was a hero to rebellious teenagers everywhere. But on April 20th, 1999, his carefully crafted world of shock rock came crashing into a real-world nightmare. That was the day of the Columbine High School tragedy, where 2 students carried out a horrific attack on their classmates and teachers. In the confusing and emotional aftermath, a nation was desperate for answers. People wanted to know what could possibly motivate such a terrible act. And very quickly, the media and cultural critics found a scapegoat, Marilyn Manson. Early reports, which later turned out to be completely false, claimed that the 2 young men were big fans of his music. The story spread like wildfire. Pundits on the news declared that Manson's dark and violent imagery had poisoned their minds. This is why this is huge. He became the public face of everything that was supposedly wrong with youth culture. He received threats, his concerts were protested and canceled, and he was blamed for the tragedy by politicians and religious leaders. The thing nobody tells you is the two individuals involved in the incident were not actually fans of his. In fact, they reportedly disliked his music. But the truth didn't matter. Manson was an easy target. He tried to defend himself, even writing a famous essay for Rolling Stone magazine about the dangers of blame and media sensationalism. But for a long time, his name was unfairly tied to one of the darkest days in modern American history. Manson was targeted for his image. For our next rock star, his controversial image came from a very personal and strange hobby he refused to apologize for. 8. Lemmy Kilmister and his controversial collection. Lemmy Kilmister was the definition of a rock and roll outlaw. As the frontman of Motorhead, with his gravelly voice, thunderous bass playing, and iconic mutton chops, he was a true original. He lived life on his own terms, and he didn't care what anyone thought about it. But one of his personal interests, a lifelong hobby, created a scandal that followed him throughout his career. You see, Lemmy was an avid collector of historical military memorabilia. That in itself isn't unusual, but what made his collection so controversial was his focus on items from Nazi Germany. What many overlooked is that this wasn't just a few items tucked away in a box. He had a massive collection that filled his Los Angeles apartment. It included flags, daggers, medals, and even uniforms from the Third Reich. He would often be photographed with pieces from his collection and even wore an Iron Cross necklace as part of his signature look. Naturally, this led to accusations that he was a Nazi sympathizer. To put it mildly, Lemmy always found these accusations ridiculous. In countless interviews, he tried to explain his position. He would say that he didn't agree with the Nazi ideology at all. He just thought that the bad guys in history always had the coolest uniforms. He saw the items purely as historical artifacts and design objects. This is why this is huge. He insisted that collecting the items didn't mean he supported the terrible things the Nazis did. But many people couldn't separate the symbols from the history. It remained a controversial part of his legacy, a scandal that he never tried to hide but always had to defend. Lemmy's scandal was about symbols from the past. Our next band created a scandal with a song inspired by a very recent and very disturbing true story. 9. Rammstein and the cannibal-inspired song. The German industrial metal band Rammstein is famous for pushing the limits. Their live shows are legendary spectacles of fire and theatrics, and their music videos are often like mini horror movies. They have never been afraid to tackle dark and disturbing subjects in their songs. But in 2004, they released a song and video that was so shocking. It was based on a true story that was almost too horrifying to believe. The song was called Mein Teil, which translates to My Part. It was directly inspired by the bizarre and gruesome case of Armin Meiwes, a German man who had found a volunteer online who agreed to be dispatched and then consumed. It was a story that had shocked the entire world with its sheer depravity. And Rammstein decided to write a song about it. The lyrics were written from the perspective of the victim, and the music video was a surreal and disturbing masterpiece. It featured the band singer Till Lindemann in a chef's hat, chasing the other band members through a dark, grimy setting. The thing nobody tells you is that the video was so intense that it was often only shown on television after 10 o'clock at night in Germany. This is why this is huge. The song caused a massive controversy. Critics accused the band of glorifying a horrific act. They were accused of being tasteless and trying to profit from a real-life tragedy. The band, in their typical fashion, defended the song as art. They argued that they weren't celebrating the event, but were exploring the darkest corners of human nature. They tried to hide behind the idea of artistic freedom, but for many, the song and video crossed a line from shocking to just plain sick. Rammstein was accused of being a bad influence. But in the 80s, a whole group of bands faced that accusation, leading to a showdown in the halls of the U.S. government. 10. Dee Snider and the War Against Censorship. In the mid-1980s, heavy metal was ruling the airwaves, and MTV was in nearly every home. Bands like Twisted Sister were huge stars, with their catchy anthems and rebellious makeup-clad image. Their song, "We're Not Gonna Take It," was a massive hit. But a powerful group of people in Washington, D.C. were not fans. They thought the music was a corrupting influence on America's youth, and they decided to do something about it. This group was called the Parents Music Resource Center, or the PMRC. It was co-founded by Tipper Gore, the wife of then-Senator Al Gore. They created a list of 15 songs they found to be the most offensive, which they called the Filthy 15. On that list were songs by rock and metal giants like Judas Priest, Motley Crue, and Twisted Sister. They claimed these songs were promoting violence and other bad behaviors. This is why this is huge. The PMRC's campaign led to a famous Senate hearing in 1985. They wanted to create a rating system for music, similar to what existed for movies. The music industry sent 3 musicians to testify against the proposal: Frank Zappa, John Denver, and most surprisingly, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. What many overlooked is that the senators probably expected a cartoon character to show up. Instead, they got a well-spoken and intelligent man who fiercely defended his music and the freedom of speech. Dressed in his rock gear, he read from a prepared statement, tearing apart the PMRC's arguments. He explained that his songs were about rebellion, not violence, and that the group had completely misinterpreted his lyrics. Although his speech was powerful, the record industry eventually caved and agreed to put the now famous parental advisory explicit content stickers on albums. Dee Snider tried to hide his disappointment, but he had fought the good fight against censorship. Dee Snider fought against powerful people in Washington. Our next rock star's scandal involved a secret plan against the most important person in his own life. 11. Tim Lambesis and his shocking plan. As I Lay Dying was one of the biggest bands in the 2000s metalcore scene. With their blend of heavy riffs and melodic choruses, they sold millions of albums and played for huge crowds all over the world. The band was also known for being openly Christian, which made them stand out in the metal world. Their singer, Tim Lambesis, was the face of the band. But in 2013, a shocking secret was revealed that showed a much darker side to the frontman. What many overlooked is that Lambesis' personal life was falling apart. His marriage was ending, and he was reportedly very upset that his wife was going to get a large portion of his income and custody of their children. He was also going through a crisis of faith, later admitting he no longer believed in the Christian ideals the band promoted. He was in a dark place, and he made a terrible decision. This is why this is huge. Lambesis decided he wanted his wife out of the picture permanently. He asked a personal trainer at his gym if he knew anyone who could help him with his situation. The trainer was so alarmed that he contacted the police. The authorities set up a sting operation. They had an undercover detective pose as a hitman named Red. Lambesis met with the undercover officer and was recorded giving him an envelope with $1,000 cash as a down payment, along with his wife's address and the security codes to her home. He was immediately arrested. To put it mildly, the news was a bombshell that stunned the music world. The singer of a Christian metal band had tried to have his wife taken out. He tried to blame his actions on a heavy use of steroids, but he eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Tim Lambesis' story was a shocking fall from grace, but our next tale of rock and roll excess involves a legendary band and a story so wild it has become the stuff of myth. 12. Led Zeppelin and the Edgewater Inn story. Led Zeppelin was the biggest band in the world in the 1970s. They were like gods of rock, traveling the globe in their private jet, the Starship, and leaving a trail of sold-out stadiums and trashed hotel rooms in their wake. They were famous for their legendary parties and outrageous behavior. But one story from a stop in Seattle in 1969 is so infamous that it has become the ultimate tale of rock and roll debauchery. The band was staying at the Edgewater Inn, a hotel famous because you could fish directly out of your hotel room window into Elliott Bay. After a show, the band and their entourage threw a massive party that lasted for days. What happened at that party has been the subject of rumors and whispers for over 50 years. The most famous and scandalous part of the story involves the band, some groupies, and a fish caught from that hotel window. The thing nobody tells you is that the details are very murky, and the story has likely been exaggerated over the years. But the generally accepted version involves some very inappropriate and bizarre acts with the sea creature. To put it mildly, it was an extreme example of the wild and lawless behavior that was common in the rock scene at the time. This is why this is huge. The band's manager, Peter Grant, was furious when he found out. He reportedly paid a lot of money to make sure the story didn't get out and damage the band's image. For years, the band and its members denied it ever happened, trying to hide one of the most shocking and weird scandals in music history. It remains a legendary, if disturbing, piece of rock folklore. That story involved a fish. Our next scandal also involves an animal on stage, but this time, the rock star claimed it was all a big misunderstanding. 13. Alice Cooper and the chicken incident. Before Marilyn Manson, there was Alice Cooper. In the early 1970s, he was the king of shock rock. His concerts were like a vaudeville horror show, complete with guillotines, fake blood, and a live boa constrictor. He was a master of creating controversy and getting headlines. But at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival in 1969, an unplanned moment with a feathered friend created a scandal that defined his career. During his band set, someone in the audience threw a live chicken onto the stage. You see, Alice Cooper, being a city kid from Detroit, had never been around farm animals. He said later that he saw the chicken, noticed it had wings, and figured it could fly. So he picked it up and tossed it back into the air, expecting it to soar gracefully over the crowd. It did not fly. Instead, the chicken dropped straight down into the front rows of the audience. What happened next is a bit grim. The crowd, which included many people in wheelchairs who were placed at the front, allegedly tore the poor bird to pieces. The next day, the headlines were wild. They screamed, "Alice Cooper bites head off chicken and drinks its blood." This is why this is huge. The story was completely false, but it was so shocking that everyone believed it. His manager, Shep Gordon, advised him not to deny it. He saw the power in the scandal. The incident, as grotesque as it was, made Alice Cooper a household name and an icon of rebellion. He tried to explain the misunderstanding for years, but the legend was more powerful than the truth. Alice Cooper's scandal was an accident that he embraced. Our next musician scandals were no accident, as his career has been marked by constant trouble with the law. 14. Ronnie Radke and his run-ins with the law. Ronnie Radke has been one of the most talked about and controversial figures in the rock scene for the last 2 decades. As the original singer for Escape the Fate and the current frontman for Falling in Reverse, he is known for his unique vocal style and his confrontational personality. But many people are crazy about him for another reason: his seemingly endless string of legal problems. The trouble started back in 2006. Radke was involved in a fight in Las Vegas that led to the tragic passing of a young man named Michael Cook. While Radke did not directly cause the young man's end, he was charged with battery for his role in the altercation. This is why this is huge. He was given probation, but he failed to report to his parole officer, which was a serious violation. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and in 2008, he was taken into custody and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. This led to him being fired from his band, Escape the Fate. After his release from prison, he formed a new band, Falling in Reverse, and it seemed like he might be on a new path. But the controversy was far from over. To put it mildly, his troubles continued. In 2012, he was accused of being involved in a domestic incident with his then-girlfriend. Later in 2014, he was in the news again when he threw microphone stands into the crowd at a concert, injuring several fans. He has consistently tried to downplay his actions, blaming his anger issues and a tough upbringing, but the pattern of behavior created a scandal that has defined his career just as much as his music. Ronnie Radke's career was derailed by his personal demons. The next story is about a rock star whose personal demons almost ended his story for good. 15. Nikki Sixx and his famous near-pass experience. Motley Crue's entire career was one long scandal, and they documented most of it in their tell-all book, The Dirt. But of all the wild stories of excess and destruction, none is more shocking than the night their bassist, Nikki Sixx, actually passed away for 2 full minutes. The date was December 23, 1987. The band was in the middle of a wild tour, and their unhealthy habits were at an all-time high. After a show, Sixx went back to a hotel with some friends and indulged in a dangerous mix of substances. He overdosed, and his heart stopped. To put it mildly, the situation was grim. Paramedics arrived and found him without a pulse. He was declared to be gone. But here's where the story takes a turn that is pure rock and roll legend. One of the paramedics happened to be a big Motley Crue fan. Unwilling to give up, he gave Sixx 2 shots of adrenaline directly into his heart. Miraculously, it worked. Sixx's heart started beating again, and he was rushed to the hospital. This is why this is huge. The story gets even crazier. A few hours later, Sixx woke up in the hospital, ripped the tubes out of his nose, and walked out of the building. He hitched a ride home from 2 crying teenage fans who were holding a candlelight vigil for him in the parking lot. The very next day, he wrote the lyrics to one of the band's biggest hits, Kickstart My Heart, inspired by the event. The band initially tried to keep the details quiet, but the story was too wild not to tell.